Let's look at the options you have for your dress, and then after that we're going to look at the pattern in detail. You can make the dress with a Kummerbund and a beautiful hem trim. You can also leave that hem trim off, of course, that makes no difference. The Kummerbund has a beautiful bow on the back. I would recommend you make really long stems, as I also recommend in the ebook, so that they hang right down to the hem. You can also make that without the hem trim. You can also make it with a turned up sleeve, or you can bind the edge, and of course I have a video for that. Now, if you want to make the hem trim, you find the measurements for that hem trim in your ebook under variation. If you want to make it without anything, that's also possible, and you can see at a glance in your ebook what's possible with this dress. Now, you need to cut the front on the fold, and you cut it in the shell fabric and the lining. You can also print off the pattern piece twice, and then you just sellotape it together down the center, and that way you have one piece just in case you want to make more of them. It's just easier to cut out. We have two lines on the armhole. One is a dotted line for the dress without sleeves, and then we have the solid line for the dress with the sleeves. The dress without the sleeves, the dotted line, is slightly further in on the shoulder and slightly higher as well, so you don't have an armhole that's way too deep. That never looks good. Cut the pattern along the solid line if you want to make the sleeved dress. You will notice that the armhole is a little bit deeper. That gives the sleeve more movement room. And also the line comes over on the shoulder a little bit further to the right. The neckline has an additional dotted line. It's just another option for making the neckline a little wider, which I think is really nice if you're making it for girls aged 8 to 12. Perhaps they might really like that. I would recommend also that you put interlining in. Just thought I mention this, but when you use the interlining, it will guarantee you a very smooth neckline and armhole without puckering, and it really is very easy to get puckering in those areas. This is not an issue with Duchesse silk, so there you could just work with the shell and the lining because it's a much heavier fabric. But most silks are a little bit lighter, and if you have that, then I would really recommend doing interlining, a nice firm but light cotton. The back comes in two parts. You have got a left side and a right side, and the left side is less wide because you have got the loops on there, and you've got an underlap on the other side which sits right under your loops, and so there will be never any gaping, and that's real important. You have got all the same lines on there for the sleeve and the neckline, of course, and you're making it once in your shell material, once in interlining, once in lining on both sides, of course. When you're cutting out the back, it's very important that you put the pattern pieces onto the right side of the fabric, and the lining sits on the left side of the fabric so that they actually fit together. You want to mark all your loops. You can mark in the center of the loop for this so that you know where they have to sit. You cut your dart right up to the point that's here on the pattern, and then you put the rough edges together to sew the dart. It makes it much easier. The other thing you will notice is that we have got a real swing in the waist here. It goes slightly up to give you that really nice fit because every back is slightly curved, and this accounts for that. The right side of your back pattern, which is slightly wider, is worked exactly the same way. You've got the dart, you've got the same lines, of course, for the armhole and the neckline, and then you have got the center back marked. If you want to make the dress just as a summer dress, all you have to do is cut off 1 centimeter from the back here. And once you've done that, you cut the right back twice. Of course, you need a pair, a left and a right side, and you do the same in the lining, and that makes for a beautiful summer dress. The last pattern piece for the back is the facing. That goes onto the lining of the right hand side, and it will stabilize that right hand side because that's where we are going to sew on our buttons, and we need that little bit more support there than we do on the left side to get this absolutely gorgeous look. The skirt has got only one pattern piece. You cut the front on the fold once in the shell fabric and once in lining, and for the back you cut it twice in shell, twice in lining, mirror image, and that gives you the complete skirt. You also got a marking for the opening that we're leaving on the center back. The lining is of course lower than the shell fabric because for the lining we've got another line on this pattern up here, that dotted line. That's where we're going to trim the lining so that it's not as long and the lining will never show, and then you don't lose that lovely shaping down here for the hem. Makes sewing the hem much easier. There's one more line on here, and that's if you want to put the hem trim on. So putting the hem trim on would make it longer, and we're cutting along that dotted line, and then it comes to the same length. When you're cutting the skirt from your 1.2 meters or 47 inches, it's quite slim. It's not very wide. The skirt will at some stage fall a little bit flat when you do that, especially from age say 6 or 7 to 12. If you find a silk that's 140 centimeters wide or 55 inches, then that gives you the extra width you need to make it not fall flat. That makes a big difference to the volume of the skirt, of course. Now, if you want to create a maximum volume, you can always cut the skirt twice. Don't forget that you need twice the amount of fabric if you're doing this. Just cut it twice, and what you will then get is an extra panel which will sit over the side seam of the dress. And trust me, you won't see these seams. After you've gathered that, it's quite a lot of gathers. Then we're going from 2 meters 40 to 480. And so that's a lot more fabric that we get. And then you get beautiful volume, and the seams will lie as shown here on the diagram. The nice thing is, of course, that you could, because you've got them just in the right position, you could put pockets in there. And of course, I also got a video how to do that in the Sewing Academy at frocksandfrolics.com. Now, if you wanted to do a circle skirt, I've got a video how you can draft your own circle skirt. But I also have a circle skirt in my Vivian pattern. And if you already got that one, then you could use that as well for extra volume, especially when it's a 10 or 12-year-old girl. That will make a lot of difference. And all you have to watch out for is that the circumference that you find on your pattern for the Vivian gathered or pleated circle skirt actually is in line with the measurement of the circumference for the bodice. So once you made the bodice, you could just measure around and to make sure that you're cutting the right skirt or that you're working with the right skirt. If you gather it, it doesn't really matter. But if you are putting in the pleats, if you say that's really nice, then that just has to tally. So that's just one of the things you can do additionally to what you get with this pattern. The sleeve has got the beautiful turn up that I've also used with the Western blouse sleeve, but it's not exactly the same sleeve, it's slightly higher. And you need to gather around the shoulder, and you also need to gather at the hem. We gather that, and you need to mark where the gathers at that lower edge start and end. And then we also need to mark where is the front, both on the turn up and also on the sleeve. And we're cutting the sleeve twice in the shell fabric mirror image, And then I like to cut the turn up 4 times in the silk because it works really, really well. You can also use interfacing on the inner side, which will be the lining side, or you could use an interlining. But here you just about get away with using iron-on interfacing. If you're working with a Duchesse satin, I wouldn't cut 4, I would cut 2 mirror image and then 2 in lining mirror image, because the Duchesse is really, really thick, and it, since you don't see it, it doesn't really matter. On my picture, I've also piped that, and with a Western blouse, there's a video on how to pipe this particular turn up. The Kummerbund has 3 pieces, and on the actual Kummerbund, you need to mark your pleats on both sides. And then we have got an interlining, which will give the Kummerbund strength. And it's really important that that's a very, very firm cotton. And I would recommend that you either starch it or just use a really firm piece of fabric. Then we've also got the ties, and the length of the ties is in your pattern, but I would always recommend that you make them quite long. Now 1.20 meters is absolutely fine for little girls, but you could go to 1.40 meters or even 1.50 meters for a 12-year-old. And you can also go right to the outside of the paper so that you get the maximum width, and for a 12-year-old, you could also extend that width if you wanted to. You don't have to, but to make them as wide so you get the same look as on the small dress. And you could also go to 35 centimeters, which is about 14 inches in width for each one of the ties. Now here you can see the ties hanging over the hem, and I think that looks really, really pretty. I prefer that. I do not like it when the ties are really short. So on some of my dresses, they ended up shorter because I didn't have enough fabric, and it really isn't worth it. It's just so sad when they're not long enough, right? So I definitely would go for a really nice long tie if you can. For everyone that is an Academy member at frocksandfrolics.com, I have an add-on which you also find in the course, and that's the bias binding for the sleeve. You can see that here on the classic bolero, but it's the same sleeve essentially, and it is a really lovely way to finish this. If you don't want the turn up, if that's a little bit too much, you can put this very, very delicate bias binding on it. And of course we have a video from quite an old video actually where I demonstrate this technique. And you can also, and this is really fab, you can use piping for this edge as well. I think that is very delicate, very nice. And if you want to do this, you will find the measurement for the piping in your instruction. It gives you the exact length. And you can see here on the left the little Paris Bolero where I've also put the sleeve on. So there are plenty of options there. And I hope you now understand the pattern and everything you can do with it. And I wish you all the success in the world making your flower girl dress.